Margaret Thatcher introduced the poll tax, and there was an enormous outcry against the injustice of poll tax.
See that local councils are accountable to their local electors.
And very quickly, without too much thought, a replacement was introduced. Previously we had domestic rates, and the replacement for poll tax was council tax.
Look again and see what further refinements may be necessary to the community charge. What refinements may be necessary to ensure that the community charge is accepted throughout the country.
Mr. Speaker, everybody knows, including, I suspect, the right honourable gentleman, there is only one fundamental, efficient and fair thing to do with the poll tax, and that's scrap it.
And that was introduced in 1992.
It is a victory for local government, but it still doesn't take away from the whole nonsense and unfairness of the poll tax.
So council tax was always a sort of really rushed mess of a tax, because it was effectively it was emergency replacement when the poll tax was very badly received, and so they kind of rushed something through. And I don't know if at the time of that being created they thought, oh, we'll just come back and fix it shortly, but I think they didn't.
And as a consequence, those inequalities which were apparent in 1991-92 have become magnified with the passage of time.
Council tax is imperfect. It's a confusing design, and it includes parts of a service charge for the services that people receive from their council, but it's also the main and only way that we actually tax the value or the wealth locked up in a property. Now, the way that works is that properties pay a different rate based on the value that property had in 1991, which is when the system first was brought in. There are 8 bands from A to H, and a different place, a different locality sets the rate for the property in a band D, and then those with values below and value as above that band will pay a slightly different amount. It means that properties with a lower value pay less and properties with a higher value pay more, but it's not strictly progressive in the way that it's not proportional. That's because it's based on outdated property valuations from 1991 when the policies were first introduced. Politicians have wanted to change this for a long time. It would be fairer if those valuations were brought up to date, but no political party has really dared touch that and actually do it. It was too much effort. So now we're stuck with this outdated valuation system.
It's meant to be the government's priority, but I think perhaps it would be worthwhile if the government were to address the fundamental unfairness of council tax.
Order. Simon Fell to move the motion.
My first political memory is that of the poll tax riots. We all know the consequences of trying to shake up the domestic rates system. But our current property taxes unfairly favour the wealthy. They burden lower value homes, they discourage efficient housing use, they undertax larger properties, and they penalise home buyers and sellers. These issues affect us all, and they affect all of our constituencies. And when these taxes are ineffective, society suffers. Council tax and stamp duty are the main culprits. From Fife to Dorset, Cumbria to Durham, I think we've put together a rainbow coalition in support of reform.
Also, it's hardwired into the way those bands are calculated. As a proportion of a property's value, wealthier, richer households actually pay less, and we think that's quite unfair. And the other way that we think it's unfair is that the highest value property in those 1991 valuations is 320,000, and all properties above that maximum essentially pay the same tax rate in an absolute value, not as a proportion. So that means as house prices have gone up significantly since 1991, we have lots and lots and lots of households now falling into that top band, and that means they all pay the exact same council tax bill. It means that we have millionaires, people who have a house that is worth maybe tens if not hundreds of millions of pounds, who get the exact same council tax bill as a pretty regular semi-detached house in many parts of London and the South East.
So you get this kind of ridiculous situation where someone could own a house in London worth, say, 60 million, even 250 million pounds, and the amount of property tax they pay is capped. It's just like a lump sum.
We know that house prices have changed a lot over recent decades. They've actually risen in price way faster than wages and way faster than consumer prices. That means that property has been accumulating value for those lucky enough to own it, but for those who aren't or were too young to own property, they're locked out of that system and increasingly locked out as house prices continue to diverge from the real incomes that people are actually earning.
So we've just sort of funneled all the wealth into property and then not taxed it.
Since 1991, the average house in London has gone from being worth less than £100,000 to now £500,000. Over that same period, houses in Yorkshire and Humber and the North East have gone from less than 100,000 to less than 200,000. It's a much smaller increase. Those price rises and that increase in wealth has not been evenly spread across the whole country.
So in London and the South East, where house prices have increased massively in that period, and therefore the wealth of individuals living in those houses has gone up, the council tax bill is still relatively small.
Look at council tax with some numbers behind it, you'll see kind of extreme examples of just how crazy the system has become over the last 28 years.
Economists and politicians have known for a long time about the strange features of the council tax system, but no political party has yet been brave enough to grasp the nettle and reform the system, either to bring it up to date, to bring those valuations up to the present day, or to replace it with something much fairer.
Reforming council tax ought to be on the agenda of all political parties if they want to ensure sustainable, fair and progressive ways of raising money to fund public services.
What's made you want to become an MP?
I didn't.
It is still an unfair, unjust and undemocratic tax.
I just want to change the world.
Once people realise they've kind of been on a bad end of a terrible deal for a quarter of a century, they get very emotional and passionate about wanting that to stop.
Land value and property was not fairly taxed in the UK. So the logical way to make that fairer and simpler is a proportional system.
It would bring enormous financial benefits for my constituency, which, remember, it's the worst affected in the country. It's £900 per household.